So, welcome. Are you enjoying the conference? Sure, thank you. Nice. So this will be a quite fluffy talk about the whys and the hows when it comes to technical coaching. But let's get this going. But let's start with some kind of introduction of myself. So I'm Tobias Modig. I'm a consultant at Citeris in Stockholm. And during the years, I have worked for like 50 different customers in 6 countries, acting as a coach, as a mentor, as a manager, as an architect. But most of all, I have been a software developer. I like to write code. So I have done this in different areas like banking, the government, media, etc. So why am I telling you this? I think I can say that I have seen a whole lot of software development going on from many different angles. And what I can tell from what I have seen is that the success factor of software development is so closely related to the skill of the developers. That might sound pretty obvious, but I'm sorry to say that most of the companies out there, they don't take this seriously. They don't invest in the developer skills. And that's what got me into this kind of tech coaching stuff. So that's what we all want to become, right? Some kind of code Yoda. Am I there yet? Well, no, but I think I've got some way up the road from apprentice to master. At least I'm better than I was when I graduated from the university in the late 90s. So who can I thank for that? Well, of course, my colleagues. I have worked with a whole lot of good colleagues, people who inspired me, people who have led me through the way, and people who have acted as my mentor. And of course, people like you, people that show up at conferences, sharing your knowledge. So big thanks to all of you. And of course, I think I should thank myself a little bit. I actually spent some night hacking code in the wardrobe. I read some books at my spare time, and I attend a meetup once in a while. But how about the companies that I worked for? Does they have some part of it? Well, some certainly do. But like I said before, most of them don't take this seriously enough. And that's what I'm here to show today. How companies can invest in the developer skills to make us developer better, more productive, and happier. But let's start by looking how it looks in a quite closely related area. How is the support when it comes to traditional agile coaching? Of course, it differs from company to company, but I would usually say it's quite good. The company, they actually invest those barrels of money, and they hire a whole bunch of kick-ass agile coaches. And we developers, we need to spend tons of hours attending meetings, on workshops, etc. And what do we learn? Well, whoa. We start to use different colors on the post-its. We have endless debate about estimations. Should this be done in story points, hours, or maybe t-shirt sizes? And is 7 the optimal number to be in a team? Or is it, whoa, is it 9? And we start to use capital letters on the Scrum board. And something going on here. I guess there's some kind of agile coach tricking with this. There we are. So how should I rip off a post-it? Is 1 week sprint better than 2 week sprint? What did you say, 3 weeks? That's not even agile, right? Should we use a burn down chart? Something is going on here. Or a burn up chart? At least my father is more agile than your father. Sorry, I'm still trying to get it there. He was your father. Sorry, I'm ranting a little bit here. But I must say, visualization, ways of working, etc., it is important. I have even done some training in it myself. But the question remains, does those agile coaches help us write better code? Well, I haven't seen that. So do we get any support when doing technical stuff? No. And still, rotten, filthy code is hard to maintain, even if it's developed in that puristic Scrum world blessed by the almighty Jeff Sutherland. So the companies, they actually invest all of those money on some kind of post-it coaching, but not a single dime on our core business, writing code. Am I the only one that thinks that this is whacked? Am I the only one that thinks that this lunatic must come to an end? I believe that we developers, we need to strike back. We need to protect our right to grow in the art of creating code. If I look at myself, for me it took like 5 years to pop it as a developer. I spent my early years using the CP pattern. Have you heard about the CP pattern, the CPP? The copy-paste pattern. It's a really good way to build stuff quick and dirty. I didn't use a version control system for years. I kept on naming stuff like Donald Duck. Writing test was a burden. Public static was a blessing. So, like I said, for me it took 5 years, and the worst part of it, it would probably have taken me another 5 years to reach some decent level of my development if it wasn't for that book, The Pragmatic Programmer, who came to my rescue. That's like 5 to 10 years of wasted software development. It's insane. It's like my own personal Apollo 13 project. It would have taken me like 5 to 10 months to reach that level if there only has been some kind of experienced developer who could have guided me. But is it really that important? Well, I still got my salary. The customers, they seemed quite happy. But at this point, I was working in the medtech sector. And do I really want to lay my own life in the hand of a 25-year-old Tobias Modig? I don't think so. Or do I want that guy to write the software on my upcoming pacemaker when I grow old? I don't think so. So I believe that doing technical coaching, it's more or less self-preservation, because we have software everywhere in the society right now. We have it in like our phones, computers, electricity, airplane, cars, etc., etc. So it's not just a way to pass competence forward. It's more or less the, what should I call it? It's more or less a way to have the whole society going on. So what is it I want? What is technical coaching? Well, for me, technical coaching is about to make developers awesome, to make people and teams to grow, to help them develop that sense to feel if the code smells, and to make them understand that good development is so much about good habits. And based on that, I think that the absolute prior one is to help developers get familiar with XP and the 12 principles. Not just to know them, but to use them regularly, to adopt them, and to make them a natural part of the developer lives. So XP, the 12 principles, you know them? We'll take a quick recap here. So we have the fine scale feedback with pair programming, planning game, test-driven development, and the whole team approach. We have the shared understanding with coding standards, collective code ownership, simple design, and the system metaphor. Now we have this trick again. We have the continuous process with continuous integration, design improvement, and small releases. And finally, we have the programmer welfare with a sustainable pace. So for me, that's the key things to focus on. But let's say that we have this really experienced team who knows all of this. Should we still do some kind of technical coaching? I believe we should. But in those rare cases, we might try to adapt to the current situation. So we might focus on, for instance, DDD, concurrency or security. So now I know what I want. So how should we do it? Well, there are a whole lot of good ways to do technical coaching. Now we'll talk about a few of them in this talk. And one good way to start is to do mob programming coaching sessions or coding dojos. By doing this, it's easy to start, it's cheap, and will quickly get a good payback. So what is mob programming? Well, mob programming started to get popular a few years ago when Woody Soul started to talk about this. And since then, it has just grown like an avalanche. So we have this team of developers who works at one common task, at one place, at the same time, sharing one keyboard and one computer. And like I said, when Woody started to talk about this for what can it be, 5, 7 years ago, I thought it was like some kind of pair programming on steroids. And I guess that's what it is. And I met Woody a few months ago, and he showed me a picture of teams now doing mob programming all over the world, from Australia, Japan, all over Europe and the USA. And I know back in Stockholm, we have successful companies like King, someone playing Candy Crush, Spotify, Klarna, etc., what team doing mob programming at a daily basis. So what's the benefits of mob programming? Well, like I said, a little bit like pair programming on steroids. So 16 eyes sees better than 2, right? So design will probably get better from the beginning. And you would, what should I call it? You reduce waste. For instance, the code reviews is unnecessary, and it's great for team building. But the question remains, is it effective? Well, if you value your developers based on number of keystrokes, I don't think that mob programming is something for you. But if you're more into stuff like code quality or how fast you can have a story reach production, then it might be worth trying. I don't say it works under all circumstances. Don't say it's a silver bullet, but I can't really see any good reason why not to try it. But I'm not here to promote mob programming. I'm here to show how we could use it as doing technical coaching. Sorry about that. And when doing technical coaching through mob programming, I try to stick to a few simple guidelines. So let's start with a mob programming setup. So this setup is inspired by, or it's actually a total rip-off from a friend of mine called Llewellyn Falco, who is the guy who got me into this kind of mob programming. And with Llewellyn setup, we had a big screen in the front, big enough so everyone in the mob can see it. And on one side of the room, we have the most powerful tool there is. It's on the right, the whiteboard. Really good. Try to use it as much as possible. On the other side, we have the computer, and that's where the driver is. And the driver is the one who does the actual typing on the keyboard. But here, there might be a problem. And that problem is silence. Silence is bad. Silence will get the rest of the mob look like some kind of human question mark, scratching their head, and doesn't really understand what's going on. And that's why we have the navigator. So the navigator more or less owns the discussion in the room, tells the driver what to type on the keyboard. So the driver are not allowed to type something on the keyboard unless the navigator tells them so. So this is called the driver navigator pattern. It's much like the strong pairing if you do pair programming. And with the Llewellyn setup here, we have the mob in the middle, and the people there should rotate counterclockwise every 4th minute. So everyone has to try all the roles. For rotating every 4th minute, it's quite short, But I like to keep it short. I know I have some colleagues who think that it's too short, but just try to find out what suits you. So does this differ from traditional mob programming? Not that much, but in some ways I think it does. And probably the biggest difference is the purpose. When doing traditional mob programming, the purpose is to build something, to create some value. But when we're doing coaching sessions, the purpose is to learn from each other. So we are totally fine leaving a coaching session without creating anything, without solving any bug, without committing any code, as long as everyone in the room leaves the session a little bit sharper than they were when they entered. I also think that the navigator role differs. In traditional mob programming, I really suggest that the whole mob act as a navigator. There are no idea that people, if they have some kind of solutions, should sit silent for 3 rotations. But when doing coaching sessions, I really believe that the navigator role is something that everyone should practice as well, and it's hard to do that when people are interrupting. So at least initially, I think that the navigator role should be pinpointed to one single person. But when you have tried it out a few times, you could probably lose up this a little bit. And finally, we have the whole mob navigating in these coaching sessions as well. And finally, with Llewellyn setup, we have the facilitator or the coach. And if you act as a coach, I have some few tips for you. So the first one actually comes to all kind of coaching, not just the tech coaching. So remember, it is not about you. It's about them, the developers. So try to avoid being in the center more than you need. So try to take that facilitator role and not a leader role. If you remember that picture from the last slide, the facilitator was placed in the back. And if I know Llewellyn right, that is definitely on purpose. He has actually told me when he does those kind of coaching sessions, he sometimes leaves the room just to take focus from himself and move it back to the team. Another thing to think about is to remember to set the stage. Remember to tell the people why we are here. We are here to learn from each other. We are not here to nag on each other's code. So please remember to do this. Otherwise, it might get a little, rusty frosty in the relations. And also, if you act as a coach, remember that's not the same thing as being the navigator. It's quite easy to start navigating when you're in the coach role. That's not intended. So just try to speak ideas instead of telling the solution. And don't come up with the answers, but ask the questions. And when it comes to questions, I think that there are 2 simple questions that you could more or less manage a whole coaching session just by asking those 2 questions. And it's more or less the same question that I think that all developers should ask themselves when looking into a new code base. So those 2 simple questions. Question number 1, does it work? Well, how can you tell? You probably know if it doesn't. So you get some kind of stack trace, a program crashes, you have gotten a bug report, something like that. If it doesn't, then fix it. Otherwise, well, I guess it works. Let's move on to the next question. Does it smell? And if you're on that legacy or zombie system, I guess we should call it nowadays. So if you're on that legacy system, I guess the answer is yes, it does. So what should we do then? Well, we start remove those smells, right? And how can we do that without breaking stuff? We need tests. So do I have a good test for the code base? Then start removing those smells. If we doesn't, start by creating those tests. And then start removing those smells. Quite simple. Guideline number 2. Like I said in the beginning, one of the key goals with technical coaching is to get the developer familiar with XP and the 12 principles. So try to use them as many as possible. It's quite easy to focus on, for instance, TDD and forget about the rest of them. So do use as many as possible, like write test, think about the design, think about the naming, check in often, etc. So if we move back to that slide from before with the 12 principles, how many of those can we use when doing technical coaching? Well, how about pair programming? Well, that's more or less what we do, even if the pair is a little bit big. How about the planning game? I think we should use it. Use those user stories, for instance. Test-driven development, one of the key things, I believe. But how about the whole team? Well, I say it's a little bit of gray zone, but if we really have this cross-functional team with like product owner, customers, tester, etc., there might not need to be there. But I really believe that all developers should be there. How about the coding standards? Of course, one of the really good things about mob programming is that we develop those coding standards more or less. We get them for free. And the same with collective code ownership. It really don't get more collective than writing the code together. Simple design. Another key thing to focus on. Keep that design simple. But how about the system metaphor? For me, that's probably the hardest part of XP. But if you can come up with some good kind of system metaphor for what you are building, sure, go ahead and use it, but I think it's hard. But the continuous integration, yes, we should at least aim for it, for instance, by creating those automatic tests that is needed. Design improvement, another really key thing to focus about. And small releases. Yeah, I think we should aim for releasing whatever we do to production in the nearby future. And finally, the programmer welfare, sustainable pace. I think we should think about that as well. I will come back to that in a few slides. So let's give us like 10, 11 of those 12 principles to work with. And that's a lot. We have something to do for quite a long time here. Guideline number 3, I guess it is. I believe that everyone, all developers in the team should be there, should attend. This has many benefits, but the biggest probably is that the people in the teams will start to talk code to each other. If they can continue to do that outside of the coaching sessions, you will see a big impact on the team dynamic and on the productivity of the team. But beware, there are always someone who thinks that there is something more important to do than attending a coaching sessions. And in the short term, that might be true. But will the company really lose millions if he spends 90 minutes on competence improvement? Will someone die? If not, I believe that everyone should be there. Otherwise, we will not really build that team dynamic. Also, try to work in the common code base as much as possible. For me, like some kind of fabricated problem often has those adjusted solutions. So try to work with production code as much as possible. What you do is not the big thing here. So just write that feature together or write some test for that module that lacks the coverage, or refactor that class with 2,000 lines of codes. What you do is not the thing here. But if you do it in the common code base, the developers will recognize themselves so they can focus on the learning instead of trying to understand that new like fake context if you have some like a learning task to do. Probably the most important guideline, remember to have fun. This should be fun. This should be something that the team looks forward to. Try to see it as that like positive window in the otherwise hectic work week. So stay away from crazy times like late nights, Monday morning, Friday afternoon. So here we get back to that sustainable pace, right? And try to keep the sessions short, like 1 to 2 hours. But does it still turns into some kind of slentrian? Is it boring? Well, do something completely different. Like take a break and do some kind of code talking fika instead, or watch a conference talk, read some books. Just remember to have fun. And finally, the last guideline. Try to end all coaching sessions with a mini retro, just by asking those simple questions. What have we learned today? What was good? What was bad? What should we do different the next time? This has helped me a lot. And we actually use it also when doing traditional mob programming. So we try to give it those 5 minutes just to finish with that mini retro. It's really good. For instance, one thing that we came up to when doing those mini retros was that people got angry on the mob because they were sitting flipping on the phones or hacking on the computers. So one thing that came out from those mini retros was to have some kind of agreement. How should we act when we're doing mob programming? And one thing was keep the phones in the pockets. So, is this enough? Doing mob programming coaching sessions. If we really want to make those developers awesome, I think that we should do more. I think that we should try to combine it with other stuff, like brown bag lunches, sending people on education, watching conference talks, book circles, whatever. And I also think that we should try to combine it with mentoring. For me, mentoring is really powerful. And being a technical mentor, it's hard. You should be there on some kind of on-demand basis for the mentee, providing guidance to protect the mentee in the organization and to act as a role model. When I have had my own mentors, what I really have appreciated is when we have worked closely together. Because when working closely together, that's when we start to build trust for each other. And when we begin to trust each other, that's when the real magic starts to happen. So I have seen so many coaching programs where the developers should meet some kind of coach, for instance, 1 hour every month. For me, that's more or less the waste. It won't lead anywhere. So what I suggest is that you, as a mentor, work with your mentee for at least 1 day a week over a period of time. By doing so, you will really build that trust for each other. And when I say work together, I really mean work together. So you should be there in the same meetings, and you should eat lunch together, and you should pair program, etc. So you can always provide that instant feedback. So, what do you think? Does it sound good? So why doesn't it happen? Most companies, they have some kind of lead developer, a tech lead, a system architect, a manager, someone. Shouldn't it be their responsibility to take care of stuff like this? And that's probably true. But the truth is that the person in such roles, they don't really have the time. They are too busy by doing other interesting, really meaningful stuff, like running at meetings, battle with steering committees, estimating that next project. So they just don't have the time. Or, to be honest, they or their organization, they don't prioritize this high enough. So what I believe we need is not more time. We don't need that 25th hour. What we need is some kind of change of attitude, because everyone gains on it. We as a developer, the whole company, and even the customers, because the product will be better, the technical depth will decrease, and without having any like real facts, it will help us keep the developers in the companies. So why is that? Well, because it's fun, because it helps us to grow, and that's what really motivates us. It's not the size of the paycheck, it's the ability to grow in the companies. So to sum it up, just to be sure, I ranted a little bit in the beginning, but traditional agile coaching, it's not waste, it is important. But I believe that technical coaching is at least equally important. And mob programming is a good way to do it, it's a good way to start. And remember to obey XP and the 12 principles. And finally, try to combine it with doing other stuff as well. Like I said, pair program a lot. Try out mob programming. Send people on education, do book circles, brown bag lunches, etc. So, back to my favorite guy and his famous words. Do or do not, there is no try. So please, go home and do this, because you as a developer, you really deserve it, and your company, they need it. So, thank you. You could reach me here at the conference, Twitter, email, connect at LinkedIn. Do we have any questions? Yes? Yeah.
So how mob programming working for remote team?
Well,
do you have any experience?
Not that much actually, but I know people who does. And it's, like I said, when I met Woody like a month ago, he showed me a picture, and there were actually a few teams that were doing this remotely. But I guess it's strongly connected with good programs like sharing windows, sharing screens, and you should also be able to communicate all the time. But it is some kind of real problem. Is Lars here in the room? There, yeah, there you are. Have you something to add up to it? Sorry for like grabbing you here.
Okay, no problem. No, yeah, got the same question yesterday also. So it's hard. It's very hard to do it correctly, because especially you have to make sure that everyone is doing remote. Because the problem is, we had this once where we had a team that was co-located and a couple of others pitching in remotely. This was not working, but you need good software to do it, and there's mostly the time where you have this Skype problem, like, can you hear me? I can't see shit. It's hard. Mob programming is hard remotely. So,
do we have another question somewhere? Yeah, up in the front.
So in your example, you showed 6 people mob programming.
Yes.
What's the biggest number of a mob you had? Like, do you have a number that doesn't make sense to go over in a mob?
Yeah, I think that the maximum I have been in a mob was like 9. That was too much, I think. In those cases, I would rather split up and doing 2 mobs instead, I guess. So I would say that this feels good somewhere up to like 5-6 people. I think that's some kind of limit.
What kind of tasks are good for mob programming? What's the best, to program as a group? That's one question, and the second one is how hard is to sell this idea of technical learning to the companies, in your opinion?
Yeah, if I start with the first question, I think that all tasks could be done with mob programming, And if you do it full time, I believe that there are what should I say? Splitting up is a really good way to not get the people back again. So if you do it full time, I think you should really keep the mob together and do all kind of, what should I call it? All kind of tasks together. Because when you start splitting up, you will not be able to catch people in again. Yeah. Yeah, that's true, but I also think it's some kind of way of seeing it as the whole group doing it together. It's not just the one sitting at the keyboard, it's some kind of collective thinking. But of course, like traditional, what should I call it? Copy-paste programming, doing the same thing over and over again is maybe not as fun to do in a mob, like when you really could, what should I call it, design new system, build something from scratch. I think that's really the most, easiest thing to get the whole team on the train, so to say, if when building new things together. And sorry, you had the second question. What?
Yes, how hard is to sell this idea to the company of the technical learning?
Yeah, I think so the question was, how hard is it to sell it in the companies, the technical learning? I think it depends on the companies, actually. If we have techie people on the manager roles, I think it's easier compared if the manager come from the business side. But that's one idea with, like I said, to use production code and working in the normal code base. Then it's easier to cheat the product owner and say we are actually still creating business value. So we are not just having fun. We're actually creating something meanwhile. So, but I say it's different between the companies.
How often we should apply this? How often we should apply this mock programming within the team? Our manager would like to sell it, for example. She's a manager.
Yeah.
And should it be some regular meetup of the team?
Well, what I have seen is teams doing mob programming full time, often, at least after a while, actually are more effective than when people work one at their own. There is some kind of picture from Wodesul and his team when they started to do that, and they compared the stories, the printouts of the stories, and this last month when everyone worked alone was this big, and the month when they do mob programming was 3 times bigger. So I really think that working in a mob is actually not ineffective. It will actually make those stories reach production quicker, and it will also generate less bugs. So I think over a period of time, the team will actually be more effective than when everyone works on their own. So no more question. I guess that's it then. So thank you.